Welcome to the webinar, Milestone Presents Microsoft Project and Agile, Apples and Oranges? My name is Bob Tyler. I'm a lead educator with Milestone Consulting Group, and I will be the instructor this morning. This presentation is based on Microsoft Project on the desktop. I'm using Project 2016, but the techniques are the same in all versions of Microsoft Project. There's one report that I've developed that requires Project 2013 or later, but I'll mention that. And there are definite workarounds if you have Project 2010 or earlier. This presentation focuses on using just the client application, but that being said, it can be used in a project server or a project online situation. We have another presentation that utilizes the project server, and that'll be available later. This presentation is using PowerPoint slides rather than the live application. The reason is simply bandwidth. I didn't want cursor movements or scrolling or saving, things like that, to impact the presentation. Also, I want to mention that Microsoft recently added a new button to the Office 365 version of Project. That button says Agile. I'll discuss that feature and how we might use it at the end of this presentation. Before we get started, I want to mention a few things about Milestone Consulting Group. We are solution-focused with our clients. We focus exclusively on Microsoft PPM solution. We have been doing so for over 15 years. We are a Microsoft PPM Gold partner, one of a handful worldwide. We're also a PMI registered education provider. And we believe very strongly in a team-driven implementation process, bring in the right people with the right skills in the right roles at the right time. At Milestone, we talk about people, we talk about process, and we talk about tools. We can provide education, PMO creation and maturation. We can do organizational change management. We can develop processes for the organization. We can develop PPM roadmaps, assess and develop new processes. And of course, we're very tool focused. We do installations, designs, integrations. We've got add-on products and support and managed services. As I mentioned, my name is Bob Tyler. I'm an international author, educator, speaker, and consultant. I've been managing projects for more than 25 years. I'm currently the lead educator for Milestone Consulting Group. And my contact information is on the screen. I'll show it again at the end of this webinar. So let's get started. If I go into one of my clients and say Microsoft Project can be used to manage Agile projects, this is often the reaction. And so I repeat, Microsoft Project can be used to manage Agile projects. To understand that, let's look at some perspectives. Executives are interested in schedules and resource requirements. They want to know when a project's going to be done. They want to know when team members are going to be freed up for new projects. Team members, on the other hand, want a working product. They want satisfied customers. That's their perspective. We at Milestone maintain that we can work with both. Microsoft Project uses a relational database. And with a few customizations and some process changes, we can use it to manage an Agile project. And good news, with no macros or custom programming required. Let's start with a simple scenario. Suppose we've got a small development department and today is Monday, July 17th, 2017. We've got a couple Agile projects that are underway. We're using 2-week sprints, and our velocity is 8 story points per sprint. Now, in real life, you may be using 2-week, 3-week, 4-week sprints. I can almost guarantee your velocity is going to be much greater than 8. But we wanted to keep our numbers very small for demonstration purposes so that we can see how the techniques apply without getting wrapped up in large numbers. Let's start by examining different roles of people who are going to use this information. Let's start with the product owner. The product owner is a key stakeholder in any Agile project. And as a product owner, I want to see what's coming up. If we look at the sprint backlog, these are all the activities that are yet to be done. I should mention that for this demonstration, we only created a sprint backlog. We didn't do a product backlog. You can use exactly the same techniques, but you could then create a product backlog that would feed the sprint backlog. In the backlog, we've estimated the user stories using story points, using that standard Fibonacci-like pattern. Notice that user story 18 had a carryover. That's common. In many sprints, you may not finish all the work at once, and so you may end up carrying some forward into a future sprint. If we scroll to the right in the view, we see a column called Sprints Remaining. Now, this is simply based on what we know. If you look at that, you see that there are some sprints that have not been estimated. So as a product owner, I'm very interested in user stories that haven't been estimated. So we created a new view for that. This view simply filters on stories that have no story points and shows them as a group, so that as the product owner, I can focus on these. I'm going to be really interested in user story 19 that's got high customer priority, and yet we haven't estimated it yet. And we created a report. We call it the Agile Tasks Progress Report. It's really a Scrum Board. It shows what items haven't been started yet, which ones are in progress, and which ones have been completed. Now, to develop this report, you need Project 2013 or later. It cannot be done with Project 2010. But we've got another report that's very similar. It's just turned sideways. So, as a product owner, I'm going to want all this information, and I'm going to be talking in terms of epics, features, and stories. Let's look at the role of the Scrum Master. My job is to facilitate the project. I've got to remove barriers. So I'm interested in everything the product owner is interested in, and then some. I want to make sure that the work is flowing as fast as possible. So here's that other view that I mentioned, the sprint status. It simply shows all of the activities that were completed in Sprint 1, Sprint 2, Sprint 3, and Sprint 4. And then underneath it, if I could scroll down, we could see all the items in the backlog. Now, as a Scrum Master, I may be the person who's responsible for maintaining this Microsoft project schedule. So how are we going to do it? Well, before we answer that question, let's look at one more role. Let's look at the role of the Microsoft Project Manager. We have to remember that Microsoft Project is a scheduling tool. That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to calculate that finish date. If we look at this project in a Gantt chart view, you'll see that we designed it to match real-life plans. These were modeled after existing plans by some of our customers. We have some non-agile activities at the beginning of the project. These are things that have to happen. They're sequential. And then we're going to do agile development. And so we estimated the duration of this agile development and recorded it in a placeholder task. Now, determining the length of that was actually very easy. It's based on velocity and estimated story points. So let's assume we looked at this project. We said it's 90 to 100 story points. Let's cut it right in half, 95 story points. We have a velocity of 8, so that means we need a total of 12 sprints. Well, if each sprint is 2 weeks long, then we need a 24-week placeholder task. And with this placeholder task, we can get Microsoft Project to schedule. And now we can meet the expectations of our stakeholders and give them an estimated completion date for this project. We should mention that we're using a technique we would never recommend using in a critical path project. That technique is linking the summary task. In a critical path project, linking the summary task will mask the critical path. And so it's a bad practice. In this instance, we have a bunch of activities that have to be done before development can start. And we have a bunch of activities that can't start until all of the development is finished. So in this case, we went ahead and linked the summary task. Now, some organizations just have a flat rule against linking summary tasks. That's fine. All you would have to do is link to the placeholder task, and you'll get the same effect. For this particular project, we also have some monitor and control activities that are going from the start to the end of the project, as well as some project closure activities at the very end. Finally, we set a milestone called additional sprint tasks. And this is simply a technique so that if I add new activities, such as Sprint 2 planning or Sprint 2 review and retrospective, if I just add them to a view, and we'll see this in a minute, Microsoft Project will add them to the end of the task list. I don't want them to be indented underneath the project closure, so I simply created a milestone called additional sprint task and put it at outline level 1. And that way, when we added additional activities, they also would be at outline level 1. And then, of course, I took a baseline before the project started. And so a Microsoft Project user is going to talk about tasks. And tasks are simply work items or activities that need to be completed. So, to recap, a product owner is going to talk about backlogs and epics and features and stories. And the Scrum Master is going to talk about exactly the same thing, except he or she is going to focus on removing those barriers to the team. And a Microsoft Project user is going to talk about tasks and talk about schedules. So let's see how it's done. We look at the sprint status and we see we've already completed 4 sprints. Remember, today is Monday, July 17th, 2017. And if I look at the sprints, we just finished sprint 4 last Friday on the 14th. So we're ready to start setting up sprint 5. To make it easy, we created a special view called Sprint Setup. And from the Sprint Setup view, we're going to add User Story 18 carryover and User Story 21 to Sprint 5. Then I have to ungroup the view. And this is because Microsoft Project will not allow me to insert activities in a grouped view. If I were simply to add them at the very bottom, then Microsoft Project would add them at the bottom of that task list on the Gantt chart. We saw that and we put them underneath those additional sprint tasks. Personally, I like them underneath the development section. So I ungroup the view and then I can do an insert. In this organization, our stakeholders want us to track how much time we're spending doing planning and reviews and retrospectives. So we've added Sprint 5 planning and Sprint 5 review and retrospective. You can add as many number of activities to a sprint based on what you want to track. You're certainly not going to track the daily stand-up because that's too short. But you might add a task for the product owner doing backlog refinement, if that was something that you wanted to track time to. In this case, we estimated planning to be a couple hours and review and retrospective to be about 4 hours or half a day. We added them both to Sprint 5, and then, very important, make Agile Task equal to yes and Sprint Ready equal to yes. And then we can regroup the view by sprint. Since the last sprint ended on July 14th, we want to start this sprint on July 17th. Now you notice there's a column that says Work Item Start Date. Behind the scenes, that's really just a rename of the constraint date. At Milestone, we say never, ever, ever touch the task start or task finish date. So what we're doing is we're setting that constraint date, that work item start date, so that Microsoft Project will put a start no earlier than constraint on that particular activity. We make the user story 18 carryover and user story 21 carryover to also start on the 17th. And the review and retrospective will happen on the last day of the sprint, or July 28th. We set the task type to fixed duration because that will help us with tracking. And then we set all of the items in the sprint to in progress. Now that we've set up the sprint, we need to staff the activities. So I just moved the resource names column into view so we can see it. And you just pull down the drop-down arrow, and you can select the individuals who are going to work on that particular activity. Now, Microsoft Project is going to show all of them as being over-allocated. Because as Microsoft Project, it's saying these people have too much work to complete in an 8-hour day. But as a Scrum Master, I don't care that Microsoft Project is telling me that. Because my team members, ideally, are devoted 100% to this Agile development. In real life, many of our customers, they're only devoted maybe 80% or sometimes 70%. But that way, I, as a Scrum Master, know what my resource allocation is. For the entire length of the Agile development, these team members are allocated 70% or 80% or whatever percentage it happens to be. And that will help me set expectations with leadership saying, here is when I have my Agile team booked on this particular project. And if I now look at my Agile Tasks progress report, my Scrum Board, I can see that activities have moved from the not started column to the in progress column. So I could print this to a PDF. I could send it to my stakeholders. It's a great communication vehicle. All right, let's fast forward. Today is now Friday, July 28th, 2017. It's the end of the sprint, and we need to record progress. Now, a quick aside. In your organization, you may record actual progress on a different cadence, perhaps weekly. Our purposes, and for this demonstration, we're simply going to record progress at the end of the sprint. Whether you record it weekly, bi-weekly, or some other cadence, techniques are identical. Let's suppose that planning was completed, but instead of taking 2 hours, it actually took 4 hours. Story 18 carryover started on time, but it finished on July 25th. And Story 21 started on Tuesday, July 18th, and it finished on July 27th. And the review and retrospective was completed as scheduled. We created yet another view called Sprint Closeout, that then we can start marking all the states as finished. Switching over to the Scrum Board, I can see that things have moved out of the in progress, and if I could scroll down on the right-hand side, you'd see they got moved into the completed column. Using Project 2013 or 2016, there's a built-in report called a task burndown. It's not a story point burndown. If you really wanted a story point burndown, you could track completed story points and then export that information to Excel. That's one report that is not native to Microsoft Project, nor could we develop it without using custom programming. But Excel does a great job of graphing, so we recommend just collecting the data and exporting to Excel. Remember that for this project, we've got some non-Agile activities that are going on. If I look at them on the Gantt chart, I see that I have work scheduled in the past. That's very bad project management. You never want to have work scheduled in a prior period, because otherwise you don't get a good picture of what your project really is doing. Fortunately, in Microsoft Project, there's a tool that's going to help us. On the Project tab is a button that says Update Project. And if I select that, I can reschedule uncompleted work to start after a specific date. And if I click OK, then Microsoft Project will move that work forward so that it is no longer scheduled in a prior period. Unfortunately, that's now caused another problem. It moved the finish date out 2 weeks. It moved it to November 21st. And I'm certainly not going to tell my stakeholders that we can't finish this project on time, because we have to have more project management and more team meetings, and so the project date is going to end November 21st. Recall that we said we never, ever, ever touch the task start or task finish date. But what we can do is adjust the assignment finish date. If we adjust the assignment finish date for the project management and the team meetings back to November 7th, then Microsoft Project will do its job and reschedule those tasks. Suppose we have to add more activities to the backlog. But let's say user story 19, we estimated it came up at 21 story points. So we decide to make it 8, 8, 5. Well, adding a new activity to the sprint backlog is very easy. What we have to do is ungroup so that we can insert a task, and then make sure that we have Agile Task equal yes. We set occurs when to as late as possible, because that way Microsoft Project will always move that work, move that activity out to the future, so I don't end up with work scheduled in a prior period. I'll set the type to a fixed duration. I'll set the total duration to be the length of my sprint, and as a result, the sprints remaining, that's a calculated field. It's simply story points divided by velocity. Since on a grouped view, I can get it to sum total sprints remaining, I can now see that based on what we know today, we've got a little more than 6 sprints. Similarly, if I need to remove stories from a sprint in progress, that's very easy. I just have to set the Agile sprint back to the backlog, set the state to not started, and set the occurs when to as late as possible. That'll take care of pulling it out of the sprint, putting it back in the backlog, and then I can schedule it for perhaps the next sprint. So to recap, define the custom fields, figure out what you want to track, which ones are needed to filter on. Use those to create new views. Make the views as easy as possible. And then define any custom reporting that you might need. As we mentioned in 2013 or 2016, we can do automatic burndown charts or Scrum boards. 2010 or earlier, we can do a sprint status. During planning, estimate the duration of the development. That's the Agile development. Make sure the last task in the schedule is at outline level 1, and then absolutely take a baseline. During project execution, set up each sprint at an appropriate cadence, track your progress, and then close out the sprint. And if you have non-Agile tasks inside your project schedule, make sure to manage those as appropriate. So, as we've seen, Microsoft Project can indeed be used to manage Agile projects, and it can be very effective. I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that Microsoft recently added an Agile button to the Project tab. I've got a screenshot that shows sitting there, and if you click on it, it will ask you if you want to do a Scrum project, a Kanban project, or none. And none means waterfall project. What that does, selecting Scrum or Kanban or none, simply shows which views are standardly available. You can always get to all views simply by going to more views, but with one of those methodology buttons, those views are made very accessible. They gave us a task board, which lets us drag and drop activities from one area to another. This is great. It's a nice interface, and they expanded the number of Agile reports available. Here's the issue. It does not do any scheduling whatsoever, nor is there any mention of story points. All these estimates are in work. Microsoft has given us a very good start. They've done a great job with it. It's a good way to get into the Agile space. We had a call with Microsoft late last year. We recommended some changes for this next evolution. And so I expect over the next several months that they are going to start implementing a lot of our suggestions. You've seen how we can manage an Agile project with Microsoft Project. This is the type of work that we do. We are thought leaders in using Microsoft Project and implementing Microsoft Project and Project Server. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar.